Hi there guys, it's Mike from MCQBushcraft here, and welcome to episode 8 of Bushcraft Basics. In last week's episode, episode 7, we had a look at water containers, and last week's episode was really just designed to touch the tip of the iceberg as far as water containers were concerned, and just equipped you with the understanding and the mentality behind that piece of equipment and how useful it can be in the field. And hopefully, whichever shape and form you choose, it will be a useful piece of equipment to keep in your pack to help you sterilise water in the field if need be. But in this week's episode we're following on from water containers, and we're actually going to be having a talk about water and the kind of pathogens and contaminants that are in our water. And the reason being is we're beginning a bit of a journey onto preparing water to make it safe to drink for us. There are a lot of products out there marketed at that and a lot of basic methods that you can use in the field. And once you understand what's in the water, you can then look at products subjectively and actually start to devise methods of making water safe to drink. The quality of fresh water that you find out in the field and drinking water can really differ all over the world depending on what kind of temperatures you're experiencing, the kind of climate and what part of the world you're in, and the sort of infrastructure you have around you that human beings have kind of built or encroached on the natural world. And in some parts of the world, human beings still throw human feces into the drinking water. And when human feces gets into drinking water and people start ingesting it, it can cause massive health issues, really serious health issues. Waters like that really become a cocktail of bacteria and pathogens, and it can cause some serious illnesses. And in London, for example, back in the 1800s, in the Thames, people were throwing human feces into the Thames, and literally thousands of people died of cholera. And it was a really serious issue back there. Sometimes cholera is treated as a bit of a historic disease in this country, in the United Kingdom, but in certain parts of the world it's still a massive problem because of human feces getting into the water table. And even animal feces can be a huge problem as well. In some countries, mass farming takes place because of the meat industry. Lots of pork, lots of cattle are farmed, and their waste is put into enormous silage pits. And these silage pits can essentially leak out, get into the water table, and pollute waters. You can avoid areas of pathogens by going up into altitude and drinking water from its source, or from fresh streams that are quite high up in the mountains that are running very quickly over stone. And you can also drink rainwater, and there's essentially less chance of you contracting one of these pathogens. But unfortunately, rain can still contain pathogens and contaminants because of the world we live in today. Things like herbicides and pesticides, heavy metals, and even cars can all cause problems with rainwater. So you can avoid these things, and I've been to different parts of the world and drunk water from different water sources, even up at altitude, and I've not got ill. There's even a water source behind me that's a very fresh stream. It comes out of the source further up, out of stone, and it's a very clean, fresh stream. And I've drunk from this and not got ill, but I have friends who have drunk from it and they've got very ill. Many people will watch this video and question why you're required to be a microbiologist to go out and enjoy the wilderness and go out and enjoy the woods. And that's not the case. I'm not a microbiologist, and my knowledge is incredibly minimal in comparison to somebody of that expertise. But I've just educated myself about the basics, so that's allowed me to look at products subjectively and look past their claims. I bought a water filter not long ago, and it said it dealt with viruses, it said it filtered out viruses. It wasn't too specific about percentage, but it said it dealt with viruses. And in a way, that could be true. If a virus is on a large particle when it's travelling through the filter, then that filter might stop it. But the reality is that most filters you buy off the shelf are not capable of dealing with viruses. Viruses can be as small as 0.004 microns, and most of the filters you buy off the shelf are 0.1 microns, 0.2 microns, or sometimes 2 microns. A lot of the times these claims are made about viruses is because it's very rare to get ill from a virus when you're out in the wilderness or drinking from a water source out in the woods, simply because viruses don't really live for very long outside of a host. There are viruses like hepatitis A that can live for quite a long time, and is actually a very hardy virus in some cases, but it's very rare that you would get ill from a virus. First of all, let's touch on bacteria. There are two main kinds of bacteria that you're going to encounter, and these two types of bacteria are very common all over the world, and their kind of quantity in the water supply, for lack of a better word, is really dependent on the kind of contamination you're dealing with, the kind of country you're in, the kind of climate you're in. These can all really have a knock-on effect. So one of the most common ones is E. coli, and there are many different strains of E. coli. Some live within your body and they're completely harmless, but a particular strain, 0157:H7, that particular one is one of the most common ones you will get ill from drinking contaminated water, and it releases a toxin inside you, and that makes you very ill. It gives you flu-like symptoms, diarrhea, loss of energy, loss of body salts through diarrhea and water loss. Very hard to manage on the trail, loss of energy, especially if you're on your own. It can be a very difficult thing to actually manage, and having a water filter on you that can deal with that kind of bacteria, with that kind of pathogen, is very useful, because it allows then drinking water to be ready right there and then. And if you do get ill, I keep a water filter in my med kit, so if I need water in an emergency, I can simply drink using my water filter, and I don't have to boil and sterilise water, which can take time, especially when you're on the move and you want to get out of somewhere and get on the trail and get back to civilization, for example. But there is salmonella as well, and very similar in its symptoms, and again, associated to human feces, animal feces, can be a hot spot for that kind of bacterium, and that can make you very ill with very similar effects, and they vary in their severity depending on the host. And the size range of that kind of bacterium ranges from about 0.2 to 0.5 microns. So that gives you a bit of an idea of the kind of filters that are rated to deal with that kind of bacterium. But filters can have other medium in them as well, like active carbon, another undeclared medium that can be patented by a company that can deal with that kind of bacteria also. Something else you can get very ill from drinking from fresh water is parasitic protozoa. Parasitic meaning that it feeds off of a host at the expense of the host, and protozoa is often described as a single-celled animal, simply because it can hunt for food and excrete, but really it's a single-celled organism, and it's very small. Not as small as bacteria though, and most filters off the shelf are very equipped with dealing with protozoa. You have Giardia lamblia and Cryptosporidium, which are two of the most common ones that you can essentially ingest. Giardia lamblia will live in your small intestine, and where it can feed and reproduce, and when you obviously excrete waste, you will excrete lots of other parasites and continue the circle of spreading that protozoa around. And if it contaminates a water source, or if animals are contaminated with it, it can really spread quite a long way, and they can live for months and months and months outside of a host, which is one of the main reasons why they're so hardy and it's so common to be infected by that kind of protozoa. Parasitic protozoa like Giardia lamblia and Cryptosporidium are around about 5 microns in size, so they're pretty large in comparison to the bacteria. Most filters that you'll buy off of the shelf will really be able to deal with them. One thing worth noting is that Giardia and Cryptosporidium have a mild resistance to chlorine, and if you're using iodine tablets and chlorine to add to water to disinfect it or sterilise it, it's worth noting that iodine and chlorine are not very effective against Cryptosporidium or Giardia. They're very effective against bacteria and viruses, viruses being a real plus there, so in certain parts of the world filtration, then adding of a chemical, can really eliminate everything if you can't boil. But iodine and chlorine are not very effective against those two types of protozoa. You're far better off, if you want to use chemicals to treat your water, in using chlorine dioxide, which is moderately effective against Cryptosporidium, not completely, but it is very effective against Giardia, and it's very effective against bacteria and viruses. So if you are going to use chemicals, chlorine dioxide is probably a better way to go. You also have viruses as well, and viruses can cause really serious illnesses, but effectively they're very uncommon. So if you're exploring the countryside and you're in remote areas, it's just not something that is very commonplace. And boiling water goes without saying, that will kill everything. There are certain strains of bacteria that aren't killed at boiling point at 100 degrees C, but you're very, very, very unlikely to encounter them. So it's just not even worth entertaining. But if you're at altitude above, say, 6,000 feet, make sure you boil your water for at least 3 to 5 minutes, because boiling point is a lot lower up at altitude. So if you are at altitude, you do want to boil your water for a bit longer. But at sea level, just bringing your water to a rolling boil is enough. Just a rolling boil is enough. When water is heavily sedimented after rain, the water's flowing brown and I can't see through it. I generally filter it first, even if it's through a rag, just to get the sediment out, and then I boil. And if I boil the water, I generally boil it for about 3 minutes, sometimes 5 minutes if it's really bad and I've got no choice, simply because that soil can act as like a casing to protect the bacteria inside. And if you only bring it to a boil with some small bubbles and you don't boil properly, you know, that bacteria can survive within that piece of soil, and then when you drink it, you know, then you can get very ill from that. So if there is a lot of soil, best filter it first through a rag if that's all you have. If you have other filtering methods, then perhaps use those, because they'll be far more equipped. And then you can obviously bring to a boil if you wish to, just to be 100%. Not that you generally need to if you have an off-the-shelf water filter like a Sawyer Mini that's rated at absolute 0.1 microns. You could literally drink out of the majority of water sources with something like that and not be ill. So we've talked about bacteria. You're looking at about 0.2 to 0.5 microns. We've talked a bit about protozoa like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, which you're looking at about 5 microns. They're quite large. Viruses, very, very small, 0.004 microns. They can be very tiny, so most filters off the shelf can't deal with that, and boiling or chemical treatment is the best way of dealing with them. If you think viruses are in your area, pretty unlikely in my area, to be quite honest with you. It's more likely going to be protozoa and bacteria from animal waste and such like that. But you also have contaminants as well. You have lead, which is around about 0.1 to 10 microns. You have things like herbicides and pesticides, really commonplace, almost impossible to avoid, unfortunately. And boiling does nothing to them because of the melting point is much higher than boiling point. And filters generally off the shelf are not equipped with dealing with them. Not all of them anyway, because they can be as small as 0.001 microns. They can be really small, and they have to be to do the job they're supposed to do. So a bit of an issue there. Radioactive waste can be as small as 0.01 microns to 10 microns. They can be quite large, really depends on the particle size. And also silica fluoride, an interesting one. It's added to water supplies in the USA and Australia and other parts of the world. They haven't done it here yet. Only one part of the country or one city where they're actually doing that, and that can be as small as 0.007 microns. And silica fluoride, you may think, what is that? It's a sort of forced medication by whoever seems to want to force it into the water supply of people, and it causes a lot of health issues. It's not good for you, and that can only really be removed by a reverse osmosis filter, which is something you can install in your home. I haven't needed to do it over here, but most kitchen carbon filters like Britas and such will not get rid of that kind of thing. Will get rid of very few water contaminants, in all honesty with you. So just knowing a bit about what's in the water allows you to then look at products in a new light. And next week, in episode 9, we're basically going to be testing out a variety of filters, a variety of chemical treatment methods, and we're also going to be looking at boiling as well under certain conditions. And we're going to approach a variety of different water sources. So some may look really horrendous, some may look very fresh, and some might look, you know, sort of moderate, like you would experience all the time. And we're going to employ different methods, and I'm going to show you how to use all these different products, and we're going to go through how we actually sterilize water. And then I'm going to show you the method that I use, which is a very simple method. And it really depends on the kind of environment you're in, obviously, the method you choose. So I hope this video has been useful for you and provided you just with a bit of insight on the side of what kind of pathogens and contaminants we're dealing with, just to educate you on what's there, so you can look at these products in a more subjective light and decide on the kind of processes you use. So please see the links in the description below. I've put a range of products there for you to look at, and a range of articles as well if you want to further your research depending on part of the world you're in. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Thanks again. Take care, guys.